This is the last case that Captain Kirk sent me. It's a Biolase case. The pre-op radiograph shows a large periapical radiolucency. The pan shows that it's relatively large, encroaching upon the inferior border of the mandible, and it's also a fused root. And it looks like the lingual plate of bone is gone, as confirmed by the cone beam. So there's no lingual bone at all. He decided to use a Biolase in this case, and the diagnosis was necrotic pulp, acute apical, what I call osteitis. His diagnosis page reveals a large circumferential radiolucency, a sinus tract. He instrumented with 20V tapers. It was necrotic upon going into it. And these are his notes in his summary page. You can slow the video up if you need to read more carefully, but basically what he did here, he did this in 2 visits, 3 months apart. He used the Biolase using Chlor Extra and full-strength EDTA with Dakin solution as a irrigant as well. And then he placed paper points. Since the sinus tract did not resolve, he ended up extracting the tooth and sending it to me. Those were my x-rays. You can see that it is a fused root. These present real problems in evaluating. So I decided to try a hybrid approach. And one side of the root I tried to section sagittally. The other section I cut axially and then took those axial slices and cut them in half so I could get some way of looking at the axial dentinal wall. And I was able to get quite a few sections and examine about 8 different areas, or at least document 8 different areas. I looked at all of these very extensively, and none of them were very different. Tried to brush away as much of the calcium hydroxide as I could, and then labeled the areas so that you'd know what you were looking at. In the sagittal section, we went up into an area of kind of a bifidity and got a chance to look at the naked dentinal wall fairly well. And all of the dentinal walls were very similar to this. So you see a kind of a debris layer. It's not clear at low mag what it is, but when you go in at higher mag, you can see there is some dentinal debris here, some calcium hydroxide, but you can also see many morphotypes of microbiological organisms. So on the other half of the sagittal section, I looked more coronally. Did not see a laser signature in any of the areas that I looked at. And again, you can see there's essentially no predentin left at all. We're right down to the mineralization front. And in many areas, it looked relatively free of instrumentation debris. But in almost all of the tubules, you can see microorganisms. Some of them look a little misshapen and unhealthy, but almost all the tubules had microorganisms in them. When you look at some of the sections a little more coronally, you get pretty much the same picture. Very little predentin. In some areas, you can see that the mineralization front has been very well eroded by the EDTA and is in a state of coming apart. And these fine little needle-like structures are part of the mineralized front being demineralized and then shattered by probably the effect of the laser. They look like little tiny microorganisms, but those are actually demineralizing parts of the mineralization front. And when you look at these sectioned axial sections, again, you see a fairly clean mineralization front, not a lot of debris, but again, looking in the tubules, almost all of them were filled with microorganisms. And it's very interesting considering the solutions used. There was no demineralization of the peritubular dentin that I could detect. The peritubular dentin looked intact and not demineralized at all. So as you go through the high-resolution pictures in the Google group. You should take a close look at this because it is interesting to see that the peritubular dentin is intact and a lot of demineralized dentin is sitting there along with the microorganisms. So if there's any questions, please feel free to contact me in the Google group.